Saburo Suzuki, the protagonist of this story, is introduced as someone who helps the chef prepare the food. As it turns out, Saburo used to be a member of a Major League Baseball team, but unfortunately he broke his shoulder during his last assignment. Despite this unexpected twist, Saburo ends up playing the role of team manager. He has learned to cook for the team members, although his future is different. Saburo continues to behave cheerfully and accepts his new responsibility as manager. He also expresses his love for cooking to the chef and even compliments him on the knife he borrowed from his grandma in the kitchen. Saburo says that the knife is so sharp and clean that it can cut through anything perfectly. However, the grandmother reveals that it is a knife she inherited from her late husband. The knife can actually cut slices as thin as a sheet of paper. As Saburo looks at the knife in amazement, she suddenly remembers that they have no cabbage left in the fridge, and she immediately asks Saburo to take her there. He ran to the kitchen to get some more. Without realizing it, he went about his duties while still holding the knife. Once Saburo arrived in the kitchen, he headed straight to the back room. However, when he opened the door, he suddenly found himself in an unfamiliar place with the door behind him, disappearing into thin air. All he could see in front of his eyes was an endless meadow. A few days later, Saburo was still trapped inside the meadow. He was lost with no direction to go, no food or water. For the past few days, he tried his best to keep going until he finally reached his limit. He fell to his knees on the ground when he finally collapsed from exhaustion and extreme hunger. On the other side, he recognized him as a forest man. Moments later, in a village somewhere, Saburo regained consciousness and found himself in a strange bed. A young girl suddenly appeared from his bedside and greeted him with a friendly smile, though then proceeded to speak excitedly in a language he didn't understand, which caused further confusion for Saburo. Fortunately, another person entered the room at that moment and called out the young girl for speaking in a fairy language that he clearly didn't understand, then told her to speak in common. Instead of the language that Saburo finally understood, she questioned his current situation. Thus, the older fairy first introduced herself as Popo, and she was a younger fairy named Pepe. When Popo explained that they were meadow elves who were part of the nomadic Karakara tribe, the sudden presence of elves took Saburo by surprise. This left him even more confused as he tried to process his current situation. Popo's questions about his origins only further trapped him in a dizzying confusion. While trying to figure out what was going on, Saburo realized that since the last moment he could remember, he was eating at the school cafeteria. It was clear that he was in a completely different world where elf-like creatures existed normally. However, he still didn't understand where exactly he was, how he came to be in such a place, and why this was all happening. To begin with, Popo tried to get answers from Saburo once again, despite his earlier silence on the question. He asked about his identity while still lost in thought about the situation. Suddenly, Popo muttered his name. Popo grabbed his face and called out to him directly, snapping him out of her thoughts. With a friendly smile, Popo assured him that they would not only welcome him if he had nowhere else to go, but would also help him if he faced any problems. Popo even said that she would also help, so Saburo reluctantly thanked them with a shy expression. Suddenly, Saburo choked and fell back onto the bed. Meanwhile, his stomach began to rumble loudly, and he felt weak that he desperately needed food. Just then, Popo rushed into the kitchen and assured him that she would prepare a meal for him. Saburo continued his walk while admiring the scenery, which made him even more excited. He was looking forward to eating his first meal. When Saburo opened the stove, he asked what fuel they used to cook. Popo casually informed him that it was mamadun, a sheep-like animal that is an important livestock for the Karakara tribe and produces milk. She said it with a cheerful smile while casually holding some of the dung in her hand, which made Saburo feel disgusted. Despite his silence, this wasn't the first time Saburo had felt uncomfortable as Popo constantly added the poop to the pot without thinking about it further. He tried to remain optimistic. He saw that the meat still looked delicious from a distance and approached them for a closer look. However, he was really surprised when he saw how much waste was still left in the food because she didn't throw it away at all. The cooking process got even worse after that. When Popo started chopping vegetables without any technique or preparation, she just roughly cut them into large pieces without even washing them or peeling them first. His face fell even further when she saw how Popo immediately put them into the pot that was already full of garbage and ended up throwing most of the flowers into the overall mix. Upon seeing Saburo's face filled with a terrified expression, Popo smiled happily to himself and announced that she had finished making the surprising meal. Hesitantly, Saburo asked her if she should add salt as a finishing touch. However, she was confused by his suggestion. When Popo states that salt is just something to be licked, even claiming it makes sense to them, Popo serves the meal she has just made, which is a bowl of strange concoction, accompanied by a cup of meme milk and a small plate of salt on the side. Seeing the disgusting food before him, Saburo lost his appetite. Although he could feel the satisfaction Popo felt from her cooking, he suddenly tried to overcome it by thinking that maybe the food wasn't as bad as it looked. He assumed that he just needed to add some seasoning to give it a better flavor, as elves are often thought of as mythical creatures who rely heavily on their magical affinity. With this in mind, Saburo began drinking the potion with ease. However, he was soon shocked to realize that his assumption was wrong. When he slowly put the bowl back, he couldn't swallow it properly as he realized that the food was very bad. Not just bad, the food was beyond his imagination. To prevent himself from vomiting the food, he tried to wash it down with a glass of meme milk. However, he was horrified to discover that the milk was also stinky. Finally, he tried to fix it one last time by adding some salt to the food. Unfortunately, the attempt failed, as the salt just seeped into the food and hardly brought any improvement. At first, Saburo tried to stop eating anything. However, his body couldn't hold him back anymore. However, when he saw the innocent yet hopeful gleam in Popo and Pepe's eyes, he couldn't bring himself to let them stay together. He quickly proceeded to finish his meal as well as his act of sacrifice. This made Popo smile even wider, even though she bore the consequences. Afterwards, he lay on the bed feeling even more sick than before. When he realized that he couldn't eat such food anymore, he panicked and asked Popo if she could cook another type of dish. However, Popo immediately confirmed that she could not. In fact, she made the exact same meal every day, once for breakfast and once for dinner according to the elf diet. In shock and devastation, his face became beaten. When he heard this, he immediately tried to stop herself. Instead of having to eat such a disgusting meal again, he firmly told Popo that he would make the next meal. Not only did he use the excuse that he wanted to return the favor for saving him from death, but he even insisted that he would make enough servings for everyone within the Karakara tribe. He wanted to show off that he had an amazing knife to help him uproot it. However, at that moment he realized that the knife was not in his body. Knowing he was worried about the knife, he quickly told Popo that he knew where it was. Carefully retrieving it from one of the nearby cupboards, she handed it back his knife to Saburo, neatly wrapped in a beautifully woven scabbard. She explained that the knife had fallen to his side when she first found him unconscious, and that she had made the sheath herself. To protect the blade, she then told Saburo that dinner had to be prepared immediately. This time, he confidently said that there would be no problem for him, with a face full of pride. When night fell, someone told the Katakara chief, Koro, explaining that Popo had brought home an ape man who would serve a delicious dinner for the night. They were curious and skeptical at the same time. Meanwhile, Saburo starts the preparation by cutting the bones into small pieces and then boiling them in hot water. This action results in foam forming on the surface of the water. Popo explains to Pepe that their grandfather once said that the foam is important for food as it contains many nutrients. However, she quickly corrected her sister by stating that it was a false fact. Instead, they should throw away all the foam as it was garbage full of bacteria and dirt. This came as a shock to Pepe, especially since she had believed otherwise all her life. She felt scared when she saw the situation and saw Saburo just throwing all the garbage away. After Saburo realized that the smell of garbage was gone, he proceeded to cut the vegetables into neater and smaller pieces. Although this scared Popo even more, when she worriedly told him that the vegetables would be lost if he chopped them, He quickly assured her that his method would make the vegetables softer and easier to eat. Although Popo was still skeptical, the next step he took was to mince the meat. Popo regrets the smaller size and all. Although he kept assuring her that he remained skeptical throughout the entire process, and even refrained from taking part in any more observations, a look of horror was visible on Popo's face. Although Saburo understood that he might look strange to her, he remained determined to prove it. She was wrong, and she would soon realize what he had done after she ate his food. Since she kept needing to mix the meat, vegetables, and salt together, he ended up making a dough with flour and water. After flattening everything out, he layered the dough with the meat pieces and folded them. Then, he placed the folded meat mixture into the broth and let it cook for a while. Once everything was cooked to perfection, he opened the lid again. He revealed to Popo the process of making the special stewed gyoza using unique ingredients from the elven world. Pepe was very impressed with the dish. However, when he turned around and asked Popo to take a look at the dish he had prepared, he was surprised to see Popo crying bitterly. At this moment, he immediately asked her what was wrong, and she honestly told him that she didn't expect him to make something so strange for their dinner. Although she was hurt by this, she went on to reveal that there was actually a great punishment for those who were deemed to have wasted the meal. This judgment is especially applied to the person in charge of making the food. And if the food was not liked and could not be used up, especially by the chief, then their heads would be cut off. This of course came as a great shock to Saburo. At this moment he frantically asked why she hadn't stopped him to avoid a risky outcome. However, she confessed that she was unable to bring herself to stop him because he looked so happy while cooking. Surprised by this, he quickly regained his composure and comforted her by telling her to believe in his cooking, as he was sure he would not fail later. All tribe members gather in the dining hall when the chief announces that he is ready to receive food. This is their official greeting to maintain calm and order. Saburo was anxiously awaiting Koro's reaction to the food when the chief took the first bite. Suddenly the Koro called out aggressively, which made Saburo even more nervous and hesitant. When Saburo thought that he had succeeded in making Koro happy, Koro stood up from his seat and praised the food enthusiastically. Then, all the other tribe members tasted their own food and gave the same praise to Saburo. Although the moment ended, when Popo and Pepe jumped into Saburo's arms, he felt relieved. Eagerly, Popo expressed her own relief at the success that made him smile. She also suggested that they start eating. After Popo took her first bite of the gyoza, a look of satisfaction flashed across her face as her eyes lit up as she tasted the incredible deliciousness. She praised Saburo for the wonderful meal he had created. Popo told him that there was a special word in his world that perfectly described that feeling and called the food ear-ticklingly good. Suddenly a light bulb went off in Popo's mind, as she proudly claimed that the purpose of Saburo's arrival to the tribe was probably to help them experience the pleasure of the delicious adjective. With a grateful face, she said that she wanted to eat the food made by Saburo every day in the future. In response, Saburo smiled brightly at the statement and asked Popo to leave all the cooking to him from then on. Although he has achieved success now, Koro still reminds them that the punishment for cutting off the head is still in effect, so Saburo must remain vigilant. The next day, Saburo was again well received when the elves of the Karakara tribe enjoyed the food he had prepared for them. However, it was noticed that Pepe was in the kitchen area. Despite the good food and mood, moments after breakfast, Popo helped wash the dishes while complimenting Saburo again on his cooking. He noted that the food preparation was taking a toll on her. Although Saburo changed the subject and showed a bad mood due to Pepe's presence, Popo admitted that she did not know why she could act like that. She also recalls that Pepe barely touched her last breakfast and didn't react much when the former tried to talk to her earlier. A concerned Saburo approached Pepe and asked if the breakfast he had made was not to her liking, to which Pepe immediately shook her head. This made Saburo misunderstand that he had made Pepe cry, when in fact Pepe was venting her true feelings by crying for fear of losing her mind soon. Pepe's mindset surprised both Saburo and Popo, who immediately asked her why while wiping away tears. Pepe then recounted that on the previous day, when Pepe was not in the women's sewing class, the two of them were having fun practicing sewing together. However, suddenly some young male elves around Pepe's age came and disturbed them, inviting them to ride memes. The other older elves chastised them for disrupting the girls-only meeting, although they ignored their words. They also teased Pepe because she ran away from them for not being able to ride memes properly. Later, they continued to tease by claiming that girls who could not ride memes were useless and would be beheaded. This caused deep anguish for Pepe. However, she quickly clarified that there was no legitimate rule to behead someone just because they couldn't ride a meme. Although explaining the reason why Pepe couldn't do it was because she had fallen off the meme the previous year while practicing and ended up getting a cut on her head, this made the young elf have been afraid of memes ever since. Although Popo consoled the former that she didn't need to worry anymore as she was sure she would do it, this information triggered something in Saburo, and he ended up clenching his fist and suggesting to Popo that they try riding the meme together. His sudden initiative surprised both elves, and Popo even reminded him that Pepe was injured for doing so. He pointed out that the injury didn't hurt Pepe anymore, and assured her with a bright smile that there was no need to worry anymore. Then it was back to Saburo failing miserably as he rode an overly aggressive meme. A strange incident occurred when Popo noted that he never expected that the meme would hate him so much. In the end, he fell off the aggressive meme as it continued to spread to other places, causing concern among Popo and Pepe. They immediately rushed over to check on him. Saburo only got back up with a bloody nose and muttered to himself about how painful and scary the trip had been. However, suddenly a solution came to his mind when he ran to another place and claimed that he had a way to get rid of his fear of the funny meme. The young man had a very strange behavior indeed, which led Popo and Pepe to assume that he had hit his head too hard on the ground and immediately lost his mind. He returned with a cooking pan strapped to his head and used it as a makeshift helmet. He laughed confidently about his plan. Although Popo and Pepe were still skeptical as they once again assumed that he had gone mad, he suddenly told the two elves to watch his demonstration and began to deliberately crash into a large, hard rock nearby and bang his head into it. His actions shocked the two elves even more. Although when he landed back and showed that he was fine, he had only shown that the path was reliable enough to protect one's head from pain and injury. Then, he started to put it on Pepe's head, but he assured her that she would do it. Pepe thanks him for his gesture, but admits that she is still scared at the moment. Saburo tells her gently that it doesn't matter whether she can ride a meme or not, but he adds that once she is able to do something that she was initially incapable of, the fun and happiness she will experience will be much greater than before, as he assures her once again that she will definitely have fun once she learns how to ride a meme. The elf girl is filled with a newfound sense of motivation as she decides to go for it. After everyone saw that Pepe seemed so motivated, it was a good thing for her. Although the latter, Popo was more curious as to why Saburo was so insistent on helping Pepe. The younger elf regained his courage. Although hesitant at first, he finally admitted that it was because something similar had happened to him before. Then, it leads to a brief flashback when Saburo is first told of his severe injury that will prevent him from playing baseball again. During the diagnosis, he asked if he really couldn't throw a ball anymore. The doctor solemnly advised him to think about his daily life during his baseball playing days. From then on, it was at that moment that he gritted his teeth and accepted his fate gracefully, although he still can't hold back the tears when doing so in the present. Saburo explained that seeing Pepe feeling depressed and held back by his own injury reminded him of himself. As he sadly recalled that the pain of being unable to do anything was a feeling that she was all too familiar with. Simply smiles in return, unable to utter any more words of encouragement, though Saburo quickly turned his attention back to Pepe and cheered for her in encouragement. As soon as she read the meme, she told herself that she would be fine. Nonetheless, the meme began to walk, but she soon fell, and she fell to the ground. Popo and Saburo quickly ran to her side. Pepe got back up on her own with a smile, assuring her two friends that she was fine thanks to the emergency helmet. She emphasized that she felt no pain at all, and thanked Saburo for his little invention that immediately helped the fearless Pepe to ride the meme. The younger elf was proud that she had managed to complete her task alone as the sun set, while her two friends felt proud. Saburo returned to retrieve his skillet and prepared to start cooking dinner, when suddenly he was startled and let out a hysterical scream. A confused Popo asked what had happened, and Saburo nervously pointed out that the bottom of the pan was cracked, most likely because he had hit his head on a large rock. It was Popo who panicked at the possibility of what had happened to Saburo. But Saburo looked calm and looked for a solution, because Saburo would still suffer punishment if he couldn't make dinner. He quietly watched for a while when suddenly an idea came to his mind, as he told her that he knew how to cook without using a pan or pot. On returning to the kitchen, Saburo took out a piece of meat, and even though Popo told him that he still needed a pan to cook it, he assured her that he would make it work. He first cut the fat off the meme meat, and then cut the rest of the meat into slices. He then asked for 3 arrows from Popo. After fulfilling his request, he stacked the slices of meat and poked them through 3 arrows so that they became one big lump for easy cooking. Popo was surprised and confused by Saburo's method and misunderstood, so she scolded him for playing with food. Saburo, however, insisted that he hadn't, and to distract herself he told Popo to help start the fire. Sulking a little, Popo explained to Saburo that her concern about his cooking methods was not because she didn't trust him, but because she could never imagine what kind of food he would make. For Popo, the food they eat is usually the only dish she serves, and this was the first time they tried a new dish in the nomadic Karakara tribe, which triggered a bit of trauma in her. He kept admitting that due to his lack of knowledge, he became nervous and excited while looking forward to learning about different types of delicacies every time he cooked. Just then, Saburo announced that he had finished collecting the leftover meat. They put the 3 sticks of meat together and started grilling them over an open fire. Popo panicked again when Saburo said that the meat would definitely burn and burn if it was placed so close to the fire. However, Saburo just smiled and clearly told her that he was grilling it because he wanted the meat to be perfectly cooked, tender, and taste good. He didn't care about Popo's attitude, and Popo's concern only increased as she watched him. Then, he started preparing the vegetables and chopped them into small pieces. Although Popo asked how to make them softer without a wok, with confidence and knowing the look on her face, Saburo told her that there are actually many other ways to make vegetables softer when cooked. As he puts the chopped vegetables into a large bowl, he then adds a pinch of salt and stirs them around until the water comes out. This way, the vegetables become softer without the need to boil them in hot water first. Popo couldn't understand how it worked and questioned whether Saburo was cursing the vegetables, but Saburo continued and told her to turn the meat. Popo was reluctant to do so at first, but when he continued with what Saburo said, he found that the flipped meat roasted well and gave off a delicious aroma, leaving his stomach rumbling and his mouth drooling. With that, Saburo announced that he could finish well. But before he could do so, he was secretly summoned by Pepe, who had returned from riding the meme. He noticed that her face looked very upset and asked what made him secretly hand over the broken pan to him. As it turned out, she eventually discovered that her pan was cracked, and so she apologized to Saburo, feeling that it was her fault. She realized that she wouldn't be able to use that path anymore as tears began to well up in her eyes. She cried because she didn't want Saburo to be in danger. Saburo and Popo are quick to comfort her, assuring her that everything will be fine once she regains her composure. Saburo assures her that she doesn't have to worry about anything as it can still cook for them to walk back to. In fact, Saburo told Pepe that the skillet was still usable despite the crack, though it confused the 2 elves. At this time, he took out a large bowl and started mixing water and flour into it. Once the dough becomes springy, he cuts it into small lumps. Popo remembers that the process is similar to when he was still making gyoza, though she notices that the lumps of dough that Saburo makes this time look larger in size. He confirmed that her observation was correct. then brought the dough back and proceeded to throw the lumps of dough roughly onto the street as if he was throwing a baseball. Once he finished throwing a lump that filled the entire pan, he flipped it over and put the pan on the fire. Popo misunderstood his actions and again scolded him for playing with his ingredients and wasting food. He insisted that he wasn't because the lumps would be edible. Although hesitant, Popo decided to ease the tension by showing the delicious aroma from inside the path. Saburo ordered Popo to turn the road upside down and showed that the dough had become a heavy, handmade loaf. The aroma of food began to spread into the air as planned. A group of elven villagers finally stopped by the kitchen as they were curious about the dish Popo had cooked this time, making them feel even hungrier than before and laughing together. Saburo then announced that they could finally proceed with the last step of the process, which was for Saburo to cut out the center of the toasted bread and slice the toasted pieces of meat, then add some salted vegetables and finally put it all together in the bread to serve a kebab-style dish. As the elves enjoyed kebabs for their dinner, they once again marveled at Saburo's delicious cooking while praying. Meanwhile, the others were enjoying themselves. Rasa Popo called Saburo and happily recounted her exciting day. Not only has she learned how to ride a meme, but also her worries about breaking the road have disappeared, and she smiles widely with gratitude. Pepe thanks Saburo for the fun day. Saburo only encouraged her to learn how to ride Umas next. Pepe also promises that once she has done so, she will take a chance and cook a new and more delicious meal. Although this promise made Popo very excited, Saburo teased Pepe because he was a glutton. Chief Koro watched from the sidelines and announced to his friends that it was time. Koro's wife agreed that it was time and explained that it was time for them to marry off someone to the Shiro Shiro tribe. Sometime later, one of the female friends of the elf girl, Popo and Chi-Chi, were told by Koro that they had been chosen to marry into the Shiro Shiro tribe. Popo and Chi-Chi cheered at the news and congratulated her. Koro points out that it is time for her as she is already 17 years old. Koro's wife also reminds her that he is good at sewing and taking care of housework, so she need not feel embarrassed wherever she goes. Although Chi-Chi seemed excited by the news, she was still a bit hesitant. Koro explained that her decision was not final and that he would not force Chi-Chi to accept the arrangement if she ended up not wanting to after seeing her groom, especially since the Shiro Shiro tribe would be visiting in 3 days with the groom. This calmed Chi-Chi's nerves a bit and she accepted. Her condition changed, so Koro turned his attention to Saburo and asked him to make a delicious meal for the meeting that he agreed to. Meanwhile, Popo looked at him with excitement as she was already salivating in anticipation. 3 days later, the messenger and Chi-Chi prepared to arrive at their place. Chi-Chi and the groom seemed to be quite confused by each other's presence, which caused the other elf girls such as Mumu, Popo, and Pepe to tease Chi-Chi about her groom's good looks. Chi-Chi defended that she hadn't made up her mind yet, but despite their constant teasing, Koro finally announced that they would start eating to welcome the Shiro Shiro tribe. The last tribe member responded by suddenly removing some strange objects from their robes. A curious Saburo asked what they were, so Popo explained that they were dried tomaton. This is a fake vegetable that only exists in the elven world, but for the sake of their convenience, it will only be referred to as tomatant. She further explained that food used to be a battle of endurance before Saburo came, because all they had was very poorly cooked food in the Shiro Shiro tribe. They had a long-standing custom of using the red color of dried tomatons to distract from the stench before eating, though it really didn't do much good once they finished grinding the dried tomatons. Chi-Chi proceeded to pass the food made by the Saburo to them, and took a moment with the groom, as the 2 Shiro Shiro tribe members took their first bites. They were surprised by the deliciousness of the food, which Chi-Chi proudly claimed was the joy they felt after eating. It was what the Karakara tribe referred to as delicious, which surprised the groom, and happily anticipated that he would be able to enjoy such delicious food every day if he married Chi-Chi. On that day, Koro was surprised to hear from Chi-Chi that she didn't want to get married anymore. This made Koro feel sad, and she felt that her cooking was not good at all. Due to Chi-Chi's sudden change of heart, Koro panicked as he had given a good answer to the tribal Shiro Shiro. In the midst of this chaos, Popo could only think of going to Saburo and asking him to do something to solve the problem that had him confused. She proudly claimed that Chi-Chi's problem could definitely be solved with just his delicacy, an assumption that caught the latter completely off guard later on. Although hesitant, Pepe sadly asked Saburo for help to make Chi-Chi feel better. Pepe just wanted to see happiness on the face of the groom, who couldn't resist the sincere and vulnerable gaze of Pepe's puppy. Finally, Saburo agrees to help and find a solution to the problem. Meanwhile, Koro regrets having to return all the engagement gifts and even the dried tomatons they were given. That suddenly sparked an idea in Saburo's mind while he was in Chi-Chi's room sulking. As she slept, she thought of a possible future where she cooked horrible elven food for the groom. However, she was disgusted by the thought, because she was actually expecting a delicious meal made by Saburo. Feeling depressed and insecure due to her lack of cooking skills, Chi-Chi continued to sulk on her bed while Saburo returned to the kitchen and started making new dishes. First, he mixes flour and water in a large bowl and kneads it into an elastic and shiny dough. After that, he covers the bowl with a wet cloth and lets it rest while he continues with the other steps of the process. Then, he sautéed some chopped vegetables and explained the difference between sautéing and grilling to the clueless Popo. Once the vegetables were sautéed, he placed them on a plate and set them aside for later use. After that, he returned to the remaining dough, took it out of the bowl, and used a spear borrowed from Koro as a makeshift rolling pin. He rolled the dough back and forth over the dough to flatten it completely. After that, he folds the stretched flat dough 3 times and cuts it into smaller dough slices that look like snakes to Popo and Pepe. Then he pours the pie dough pieces into boiling water and slowly turns them into noodles. After that, he adds the stir-fried vegetables to the noodles and stir-fries them once more. Finally, he adds salt and dried tomaton slices to give it a unique flavor. Once finished, the new dish, although not directly shown what exactly it was, they brought it to Chi-Chi's room and knocked on her door to show her what they had made. However, in a gloomy mood, Chi-Chi reluctantly opened the door. However, her feelings soon changed once she saw the dish held by Saburo. He revealed that the dish was called yaki udon, a type of Japanese noodle that he had slightly modified by using dried tomatons, typical of the Shiro Shiro tribe. He then told her that he was sure she would be able to learn to cook the food he made, especially with her excellent sewing skills. Hence, he suggested that they practice making the food together so that he would be ready to serve him delicacies to Chi-Chi. Chi-Chi's was also stunned as she simply said that it smelled delicious, and then she took a bite of the yaki udon as expected. She praised the dish for its deliciousness, with tears welling up in her eyes and a genuine smile. Chi-Chi's face also looked bright, which made Popo and Popo happy to see it because it meant that Chi-Chi was finally feeling comforted again. Chi-Chi was finally enjoying a happy marriage with her husband whom she loved very much. On top of that, she was also happy to be able to bring him along. An ape-man was an expert cook. That Saburo was the one who taught Chi-Chi how to cook Shiro Shiro tribal dishes. Sometime later they all gathered together with Popo's family and other families. The Savannah Elves all slept together as one big family. They slept together because the Prairie Elves explained that it would help keep their bodies warm in the cold night on the prairie. The next morning, all the family members slowly woke up one by one. Pepe, who the most energetic bird, was the first to wake up and innocently greeted Saburo, who was still in his pajamas. Saburo felt a little confused seeing Pepe as she was still a healthy teenager with raging hormones. The story that goes on to show a normal day in the life of the Prairie Elves and explains what they actually do to contribute to the community, especially for little ones like Pepe. Their morning work consists of going to the cage where the memes are and cleaning up their droppings. They do this by collecting the meme's feces using a shovel and throwing it against a rock so that it forms a pyramid-shaped tower. The aim is for the poop to dry and be used as temporary fuel for older children and adults. Women like Popo milk the meme for their morning chores. while men like Saburo are in charge of shaving the meme's hair. Unfortunately, some men like Saburo are hated by memes, so one of the men is unable to do this. In the afternoons, the women practice textile sewing, weaving, and beating the men who listen to the memes to the grassy plains to forage and hunt for meat. Saburo found Popo at the hunting grounds, instead of joining the women in handwork. She explains that she is actually not good enough at such things and ends up helping the men. This confuses him. When he remembered, he claimed that she made a sheath for his knife earlier. However, she sheepishly admitted that it was actually Pepe who did most of the work since then. Despite that, she continued to mess up, and eventually, on that night, the only work that was actually done was by Saburo. Then Saburo prepared the ingredients and cooked dinner for the tribe. As they finished their meal, Koro prayed for everyone to be grateful for all the blessings they had received that day. Then, Koro announced the beginning of the evening's festivities, before they continued their program for the night. Nervously, Popo gave Saburo a surprise gift of a new sheath she had made herself for his knife. Saburo didn't notice Popo's somewhat confused and embarrassed demeanor. He just thanked her casually and wasn't satisfied with his reaction. Popo only encouraged him to beat the drums for the evening's festivities. At this point, it was explained that the elves did not do any more work after dinner. They relax and celebrate by singing, dancing, and playing music together. A simple life together in harmony, enjoying nature and living happily. That is the typical elven lifestyle of the prairie elves. In the next story, the story returns to the normal storyline after some time. Saburo expresses how amazed he is when it is revealed that Popo and Pepe have taken him to visit the largest city in Savannah, the city of Kurikuri, which is very strange because the city streets seem to be bustling with various customer and merchant stalls. Popo proudly claimed that the city had everything in it and told him about it. Popo checked if there was anything he wanted. Before he could even finish her sentence, his hands were already running to check for new things on their own. As they walked through the town, Saburo found a bread stall that sold unique and good quality bread. Bread! His amazement was interrupted when Popo asked him to catch up as they had to sell the memes they had brought first. They could earn some silver if the merchants were willing to buy them once they arrived at the shop. At the square, they met a young elven merchant girl who was a dark elf. Saburo didn't understand much about the world economy and exchange rates, so he asked Popo how much he could get. Saburo estimated that for 1 silver piece, they could buy 10 pieces of cloth or a basket of onions. The low price surprised him, so he asked if memes were considered a very cheap commodity. The merchant explained to him that every Savannah elf had at least a few memes, so it was no surprise that the low price of memes was due to high supply and low demand. In an effort to find other ways to earn extra income, Popo suggested that they try selling wool embroidery, both in the form of clothing and beaded jewelry. However, this suggestion was rejected by Popo, even though she pointed out that wool embroidery is an item that no one can make easily. Popo even said that she herself could not make it with just one try. However, a new idea came to Saburo's mind when he suggested that they open a food stall and sell delicious food. His words piqued the interest of the small trader, although Popo said that the idea was too impractical since they were from a nomadic tribe. According to Popo, it would be difficult for them to set up shop in one place every time they traveled. Moreover, Popo reminded Saburo that his top priority should still be making delicacies for their own tribe at the moment. The small merchant then joined the conversation and asked more about the delicacies that Saburo had talked about earlier. Proudly, Popo tells his friend that delicious food means happy eating. Although the petty merchant was skeptical about it, Saburo became curious as to how bad the city food he ate was. Confidently, Popo noted that the bread looked good from the stall she had seen earlier. The small merchant quickly agreed that he liked the bread and that it was the only good food they could get. Unfortunately, she also pointed out that dieting on bread alone is unhealthy and toxic, as one will easily get sick and die. Her face looked sad. The little merchant then admitted that the food they used to eat was not very good. Therefore, most people try to make up for it by eating bread with them, pretending that it tastes better. However, the quality of their food was still poor. That was why he couldn't believe in the concept of delicious food. Popo and Pepe were soon saddened by the sad story of the little merchant who pitied them for being able to relate to them. Before Saburo's arrival, Popo decided to try and change her point of view. Popo invited the petty traders to dinner with the Karakara tribe. That night, Popo insisted that their tribe was always happy to take guests, as it was convinced by Popo's words of encouragement. Eagerly, the petty traders accepted their invitation. When dinner time came, the other elves were quite surprised at how quickly the little merchant managed to devour the entire plate of yaki udon served by Saburo, with a satisfied look on his face. She agreed that she did feel good while eating, and asked Saburo more about the dishes. Koro immediately interjected, and proudly claimed that Saburo was also capable of making many other foods, and extended an invitation, letting him come eat with the Karakara tribe whenever she wanted. However, the small merchant was already thinking of more than that as he grabbed the Saburo's hands. She praised them as hands that could produce gold, and offered to open a shop with him, surprising everyone in the room with the sparkle in their eyes. The small merchant claims that they will be able to make a fortune with his amazing food, though Popo quickly jumps between them and pulls him away from the merchant. She told her that he was already part of the Karakara tribe. The little merchant wasn't willing to back down just yet when she asked if he wanted to provide her with delicious food for every elf in the world, especially with how his one yaki udon dish had saved her from her own mental hell regarding food. However, Saburo refused the small merchant's offer, and told her that the Karakara tribe had long welcomed him into their family, as if he was one of them when he was alone. Then he could not bring himself to go to a place where he could not continue to feed them, especially since they were already like family to him at that moment. His reply caught the attention of the little merchant. Meanwhile, Popo wrapped an emotional hug around Saburo and was touched by his words. Seeing how well Saburo got along with them and the rest of the Karakara tribe, the petty trader could only give up and grimly admit that he couldn't simply separate him from his family. Even then, she was still devastated by the lack of profit from the delicious food at the venue. Saburo told the small merchant that he still wanted to help the elves get better food in their lives. He has an alternative idea in mind, but he needs time to prepare it. The petty trader enthusiastically agrees to wait for him for as long as he needs in the kitchen. Saburo takes the petty trader, Popo, and Pepe with him to show them the idea. He revealed to them that he had discovered an interesting type of food, the superfruit. However, when the fruit appeared, the three elves showed their great dislike for the fruit due to its bitter taste. Saburo kept a confident demeanor as he claimed that he was able to make something delicious and portable for the small merchant to sell. He then begins his preparations by warming the milk and squeezing the juice from the superfruit into it. This action should have caused a sense of horror. However, the reaction from Pepe and Popo when they reminded him that they had just said that they hated the fruit. Saburo ignored them, and soon the small merchant realized that the concoction was slowly becoming solid. Saburo confirmed that it was supposed to and began extracting a portion of it and putting it into a piece of cloth. Then he wrapped the cloth around him and squeezed the water out after it hardened. Afterward, he wrapped the cloth again and placed it under a rock, letting the pressure of the rock push the remaining water out. After completing his task, he informed the elves that they would have to wait until the next morning for the water to be disposed of. Although this initially caused a bit of anger from them, he promised that everything would be over after the next morning. Proudly, Saburo declared that he would make the best breakfast ever for the elves, even if they were still in their pajamas. Finally, he unwrapped the cloth and was delighted to see that it had turned into a solid, soft block. Although the elves felt somewhat disappointed and scared by the object because they didn't understand its meaning, Saburo remained patient and continued to cut the white block into smaller slices. Then, he placed the slices on a stick and warmed them until they melted. Afterward, he placed the slices on top of a few slices of fresh bread that he had just bought from the town bazaar. He revealed that the dish was the usual elf-style cheese toast. The elves happily devoured the food as they found it delicious and exciting in a unique way. The small merchant also thought the same and quickly agreed to buy it from him. After that, The petty merchant immediately returned to the city to open his business with the new item. When Saburo and Popo saw how happy the little merchant was, they felt happy too. However, 3 days later they were suddenly visited by an adult dark elf with a terrifying aura. The dark elf was looking for Saburo, and as soon as she approached, he immediately gave the little merchant a tearful look, apologized, and begged for his help. Finally, they had another meeting at the chief Koro's house, as revealed by their elder sister or mother. The unnamed small merchant, whom we will refer to as the elf mistress, faced a problem with the cheese made by Saburo. Although Saburo apologized for the problem, he still explained that he just wanted to make everyone happy with his cheese. The elf lady told him that they were in a mess because the cheese was selling so well. When asked how many cheeses they currently had, the elf lady revealed that there were only about 30, which was far from enough. They had just received an order for a staggering 3,000 cheeses, and they were worried that they would lose their reputation and go bankrupt if they could not fulfill the order due to the limited supply of cheese. Although Saburo had told her that it was impossible to make 3,000 orders in a very short period of time, even with the help of the entire tribe at this point, the elf mistress revealed further that she had tried to plead with the client. However, the final condition for listening to them was to bring the person behind the cheese toast in the first place. When the small merchants pleaded with Saburo for a solution, he agreed to meet with their client, but not before the two merchants gave him a few things in advance. Moments later, they arrived at the wealthy client's mansion, and once they met him in person. He immediately asked Saburo to give him more cheese toast, although he was a little intimidated by the client's attitude. He remained calm and confronted the client with his plan. He took out a regular loaf of bread for the client, but then proceeded to do something different. From the cheese toast, he instead spread a bunch of fresh cottage cheese on the bread and added a mysterious type of syrup from a bottle he had prepared earlier. With that, he served the client a sweet version of the cheese toast that was completely different from the first version, but just as delicious. Meanwhile, others enjoyed the taste. The elf lady asked what he did to the recipe, and he replied that he only made sweet misawame syrup from wheat. Saburo explained to her how to make it using wheat sprouts. The first step is to pound the sprouts into flour, then boil the wheat and sprout powder to a porridge, then let it sit overnight. The fourth step is to strain using a cloth. The next step is to boil on high heat until half is left. After the amount is half, reduce the heat and stir until the texture is like mud, and the misawame syrup is finished. And with that misawame syrup made will make others feel addicted even more. The new dish that Saburo introduced to his client, and the client agreed that the sample of the sweet version was more than enough for him, and agreed to wait however long it took for the cheese order to be ready. Everyone was instantly relieved and satisfied with the client's change of mind, but their relief was short-lived when the client proceeded to increase his order by asking for 3,000 orders of syrup, which also took them by surprise. Meanwhile, a mysterious person finally ate the cheese that the small merchant was selling and recognized it as soon as he saw it. It looked like the person had come down from the mountain. He also seemed to be smiling under the cloak that covered his head and body, and said that this time he would not let go. As a fellow earthling,